They said the car didn't belong to her before they even asked her name. The words hung in the night air, sharp and certain, as red and blue lights painted the street in restless flashes, reflecting off the polished surface of a brand-new luxury coupe parked under a quiet row of oak trees in a neighborhood where every driveway told a story about who was allowed to belong and who wasn't. Aaliyah Carter stood beside the driver's door, keys still warm in her hand, her breath steady despite the sudden circle of attention closing in around her, the low hum of engines, the crackle of a radio, the distant murmur of neighbors stepping onto porches just far enough to watch, but not close enough to speak. She was 19, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, her sneakers still dusted from the long walk she used to take every morning back when success was just an idea scribbled in notebooks and coded into sleepless nights. And now here she was, standing next to something she had earned, something she had built toward one line of code at a time. Yet none of that seemed visible in the way the moment unfolded around her. An officer approached, posture rigid, eyes scanning not the documents in her hand but her face, her clothes, the quiet contradiction she represented against the gleaming machine beside her, and somewhere behind him another voice muttered into a radio, the kind of voice that carried assumptions more than questions. Aaliyah didn't move quickly, didn't raise her voice, didn't try to fill the silence with explanations that no one had asked for yet. She simply stood there, shoulders relaxed, fingers loosely curled around the key fob, as if holding onto something invisible that no one else could see, something steadier than the flashing lights, steadier than the weight of judgment pressing into the scene. The air felt heavier with each passing second, like time itself had slowed just enough for every glance, every shift of stance, every unspoken thought to stretch longer than it should, and still no one had asked the simplest thing, the one question that could have changed everything before it even began. Somewhere a camera phone lifted, capturing fragments, angles, reflections, turning a private moment into something public without context, without history, without truth, and Aaliyah's gaze drifted briefly across the windshield where her reflection flickered between colors, red then blue then red again, as if the world couldn't decide how to see her. She inhaled slowly, the cool night air filling her lungs, grounding her, reminding her of every late night, every risk, every quiet decision that had led to this exact moment. And when she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud, wasn't defensive, wasn't rushed, it was calm, measured, almost gentle, like someone placing a fact carefully on a table no one had bothered to look at yet. A single sentence that didn't fight the tension but existed inside it, waiting to be heard, waiting to be believed, waiting to see if truth alone could hold its ground against everything already assumed. Aaliyah Carter had learned early that silence could be louder than explanation, that sometimes the world decided who you were before you ever opened your mouth. And tonight felt like one of those moments unfolding in slow motion under flashing lights and watchful eyes. Yet this night had not started here, not in the middle of a quiet street surrounded by strangers and suspicion. It had started hours earlier in a cramped apartment on the third floor of a worn brick building across town where the hum of an old air conditioner blended with the soft glow of a laptop screen casting pale light across her face as lines of code scrolled past like a language she had taught herself to speak when no one else was listening, her fingers moving with quiet precision, pausing only to sip from a cup of cold coffee that had long lost its warmth but not its purpose. Because this was how everything had begun for her, not with privilege or shortcuts, but with nights measured in keystrokes and mornings that arrived too quickly. She had built something small at first, an app that solved a problem most people ignored, then refined it, tested it, failed, fixed it again, until eventually it caught attention, real attention, the kind that came with emails from people who did not know her but suddenly needed her, contracts written in language she had to teach herself to understand, numbers that once felt impossible now sitting in her account with quiet proof that effort could turn into something real if you held on to it long enough. Earlier that evening she had stood inside a dealership where polished floors reflected overhead lights so bright they almost felt artificial, salesmen in tailored suits speaking in practiced tones that softened only slightly when they realized she was not browsing but buying. And even then there had been a pause, subtle but present, a glance at her clothes, her age, her calm confidence that did not match what they expected, until she placed her card on the desk without hesitation, until the screen confirmed what she already knew, until the tone shifted from polite skepticism to careful respect. Paperwork signed, keys handed over, a brief moment where she allowed herself to feel it. Not pride exactly, but something quieter, something earned. She had driven slowly at first, hands steady on the wheel, adjusting to the smooth response of a machine that felt nothing like the second-hand car she had relied on for years, the engine humming low and controlled, the city lights stretching across the windshield like a moving painting as she crossed into neighborhoods she had only passed through before, not because she needed to be there, but because she wanted to see what it felt like to exist in spaces that once seemed distant, unreachable. Until now. And yet as she parked beneath those tall trees and stepped out into the stillness, she noticed the way a curtain shifted in a nearby window, the way a porch light flicked on a second too quickly, the way presence alone could trigger attention, not curiosity, but something sharper, something that did not ask who she was but assumed who she could not be. And even then she had remained still, keys in hand, taking in the quiet before it broke, because somewhere deep inside, she understood that moments like this were never really about the car, never about the street, never about the night itself, but about something older, something invisible that followed her into every room, every opportunity, every success, something that did not disappear just because she had earned her way forward. And now as the red and blue reflections danced across the same polished surface she had admired just an hour before, that understanding settled back into place, steady, unshaken, as if reminding her that what she built could not change what others chose to see, only how she chose to stand within it. Officer Daniel Reeves had already made up his mind before the first word left Aaliyah's lips, and it showed not in anything dramatic but in the quiet certainty of his posture, the way his shoulders squared as he approached, the way his gaze moved past her explanation as if it were background noise rather than information worth considering. Because to him this moment fit into a pattern he believed he understood, a late-model luxury vehicle parked in a neighborhood where every license plate and every face was familiar, and then something that did not match, something that disrupted the expectation he had carried into every shift for years. And instead of questioning the expectation, he questioned her. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to assert control, but not close enough to invite conversation. His radio clipped to his shoulder, murmuring fragments of unrelated calls, his partner lingering just behind him scanning the street, as if the situation had already escalated beyond what it actually was. And still no one had asked her a simple question. No one had said who owns the vehicle. No one had asked for identification in a way that suggested curiosity rather than confirmation, because the tone had already been set before procedure could catch up. Reeves gestured slightly toward the car, his voice calm, but edged with something firmer than necessary as he asked her to step away from the vehicle, not as a request, but as an instruction, and Aaliyah complied without hesitation, taking a small step back onto the curb, her movements controlled, deliberate, her eyes steady as she watched him circle the car with a slow, methodical pace that felt less like inspection and more like validation of a conclusion he had already reached. The neighborhood remained unusually quiet, the kind of silence that gathers when people are watching from behind glass, when porch lights stay on longer than usual, when curiosity outweighs comfort, but not enough to bring anyone outside. And somewhere in that stillness a second patrol car pulled up, its headlights washing over the scene and briefly illuminating Aaliyah's face in stark contrast before fading back into the rhythm of flashing lights. Reeves glanced at the license plate, then at his tablet, then back at her again, his brow tightening slightly, as if something did not align, but not enough to shift his stance, not enough to reconsider, just enough to create a pause that stretched longer than expected. Aaliyah spoke again, her voice even, measured, offering information without defensiveness, telling him that the registration was in her name, that the documents were in the glove compartment, that he could verify everything if he chose to look, but each word seemed to land against a wall built not from facts but from assumption, and Reeves responded with a brief nod that acknowledged the sound of her voice without fully engaging with its meaning. His partner moved closer now, exchanging a glance that carried silent agreement, the kind of understanding built over time between people who had worked the same streets, seen the same patterns, trusted the same instincts, And in that exchange the situation solidified further, not because of evidence, but because of alignment, because two people seeing the same thing in the same way felt like confirmation even when it was not. Aaliyah stood there with the faint hum of the engine still ticking as it cooled behind her, the scent of warm metal and asphalt mixing with the night air, her reflection faintly visible in the side window, fragmented by light and motion. And for a moment she allowed herself to notice how surreal it felt. How quickly something earned through months of work and years of persistence could be questioned in seconds by someone who had never seen the path that led to it. Reeves finally turned back toward her, his expression set, his decision made, and though nothing had been proven, nothing had been confirmed, the direction of the moment had already shifted, not toward understanding but toward control, not toward clarity but toward a process that would unfold step by step exactly as he expected it to, regardless of what she had already said or what the truth quietly waited to reveal. The moment did not explode. It tightened, like a knot being pulled 1 inch at a time, subtle but undeniable, as Officer Reeves shifted his stance and gave a small, almost dismissive gesture toward his partner, and without raising his voice he began issuing instructions that carried the weight of assumption rather than evidence, asking Aaliyah to place her keys on the hood and step further back, his tone controlled, practiced, the kind of authority that expected compliance without question. And Aaliyah complied again, not because she agreed with what was happening, but because she understood that escalation would not serve truth in a moment, where truth had not yet been invited into the conversation. The cool metal of the car reflected her movement as she set the keys down gently, the soft click echoing louder than it should have in the stillness. And for a brief second her fingers lingered there before she stepped back onto the edge of the curb, the distance between her and the car now more symbolic than physical, as if ownership itself had been pushed out of reach by something invisible but very present. Reeves moved closer to the vehicle, peering through the tinted glass, his reflection overlapping with his partner's in the window, two figures standing where one truth existed, yet neither of them reaching for it. And behind them the second patrol car idled with a low rumble, its headlights stretching long shadows across the pavement that shifted with every slight movement. Aaliyah's voice came again, steady, grounded, offering clarity in the simplest terms, explaining that the registration was inside, that the documents were accessible, that verification required only a few seconds of attention, but Reeves responded with a brief acknowledgement that felt procedural rather than receptive, as if her words were being filed somewhere without being processed. And instead of reaching for the glove compartment as she had suggested, he turned slightly and spoke into his radio, requesting confirmation through channels that took longer, that added layers, that reinforced control rather than resolution. The seconds stretched, then folded into minutes, each one carrying the quiet tension of something unresolved, and Aaliyah stood with her hands relaxed at her sides, her posture upright, her breathing even, refusing to let the moment define her demeanor, even as it tried to define her identity. A faint breeze moved through the trees above, leaves shifting softly, a sound so gentle it contrasted sharply with the rigid structure of the scene below, and somewhere a car passed at the far end of the street, slowing briefly before continuing on, the driver choosing distance over involvement. Reeves glanced back at her again, his expression unchanged, but there was a flicker now, something almost imperceptible, not doubt exactly, but the earliest hint of friction between expectation and possibility. And instead of leaning into that friction, he reinforced his position, stepping closer and repeating his instruction for her to remain where she was, as if the repetition itself could stabilize a narrative that had not yet been confirmed. Aaliyah did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not attempt to reclaim the moment through force or emotion. She simply held her ground in the only way that mattered, through presence, through patience, through the quiet certainty of someone who knew that truth did not need volume to exist, only time to be seen. And as the radio on Reeves's shoulder crackled again, with incoming information not yet clear enough to change anything, the entire scene hovered in that fragile space between assumption and revelation, where everything felt decided and nothing had actually been proven. The air shifted almost imperceptibly as the waiting stretched beyond what felt reasonable, the kind of delay that does not resolve tension but deepens it, pressing quietly against every second until even the smallest movement seemed amplified. And Aaliyah remained where she was told, feet planted on the edge of the curb, shoulders relaxed but unmoving. Her gaze steady as the scene around her continued to unfold in a direction she had not chosen yet refused to resist with anything but composure. Officer Reeves spoke again into his radio, his voice low and controlled, requesting additional confirmation with a tone that suggested necessity rather than doubt. And the response that came back was fragmented, partial, not enough to conclude anything, but enough to justify continuing exactly as he had already decided. And that was all he needed, not clarity, but continuation. His partner stepped closer to Aaliyah now, not aggressively, but with a presence that narrowed her space, reinforcing the boundary that had been drawn without explanation. And for a moment the two of them stood in a quiet standoff that was not about confrontation but about perception, about who was seen and who was not, about what was believed before it was proven. Aaliyah spoke once more, her voice calm, offering again the simplest path to resolution, telling them that everything they needed was within reach, that verification did not require time or escalation, only willingness. But her words seemed to dissolve into the night air without changing the course of the moment, and that realization settled into her chest with a quiet weight, not fear, not anger, but something steadier, something that understood this was no longer about a car or a document but about something deeper that could not be corrected by logic alone. The flashing lights continued their endless cycle, red then blue then red again, washing over her face, over the polished surface of the car, over the uniforms of the officers, creating a rhythm that felt almost detached from reality, like a loop that refused to break. And in that rhythm time stretched even further, long enough for more windows to glow faintly with watching eyes, long enough for the quiet street to feel like a stage where every movement carried meaning beyond itself. Reeves finally turned back toward her fully, his decision now settled into action, and though his voice remained controlled, there was a firmness to it that left little room for interpretation as he instructed her to place her hands where he could see them and remain still, not because anything had been proven, but because the process he had chosen required it. And Aaliyah complied again, lifting her hands slowly, deliberately, her movements careful not out of fear but out of understanding. Understanding that any deviation, any sign of frustration, would only reinforce what had already been assumed. The distance between truth and outcome widened in that moment, stretched by procedure, by perception, by a refusal to pause and reconsider. And yet Aaliyah did not let that distance change her posture, did not let it alter the quiet steadiness she held onto. Because somewhere beneath the tension, beneath the lights and the voices and the unspoken judgments, she knew something they did not yet see, something that had not changed no matter how the moment was unfolding. And as the radio crackled, again with a clearer response beginning to form but not yet fully delivered, the scene hovered on the edge of revelation, suspended between what was believed and what was about to be proven, between control and truth, between a narrative built in seconds and a reality built over years waiting for its turn to be heard. For a moment, everything stopped moving even though nothing actually changed, the lights still flashing, the radios still murmuring, the officers still standing in place. Yet something inside the scene shifted into a quieter space, a space where sound seemed softer and time seemed slower, as if the night itself had taken a breath and was holding it, waiting. Aaliyah stood with her hands visible, her posture steady, her shoulders neither tense nor relaxed but balanced, grounded, her breathing slow and controlled as she focused not on the voices around her, but on something internal, something that could not be shaken by what was happening outside of her. Because she had learned long ago that not every moment required reaction, some moments required endurance. The red and blue reflections moved across her face in soft waves, painting her expression in alternating color, but her eyes remained the same, clear, present, aware, not searching for approval, not seeking validation, simply observing, absorbing, allowing the moment to pass through her without taking something from her that she could not get back. The street felt distant now, like it existed just beyond a thin layer of glass, the faint rustle of leaves overhead blending with the low hum of engines and the quiet crackle of static, creating a soundscape that felt almost detached from the tension it carried. And in that stillness, Aaliyah became the calmest point in the entire scene. The only thing not reacting, not escalating, not shifting with the assumptions that had been placed around her. Officer Reeves stood a few feet away, his stance unchanged, yet his attention flickered briefly, not fully away from her, but not fully locked onto her either, as if something in the silence had begun to reach him in a way her words had not. And for the first time since the moment began, there was a pause in his certainty, small, almost invisible, but present. His partner adjusted his position slightly, glancing between Reeves and Aaliyah, then toward the car, then back again, the rhythm of control beginning to show the faintest cracks, not enough to break the structure, but enough to reveal that it was not as solid as it had seemed just minutes before. Aaliyah lowered her gaze for a brief second, not in submission but in reflection, her mind tracing the path that had led her here, the long nights, the quiet discipline, the countless moments where no one was watching and nothing was guaranteed, and she realized that none of that had changed, not because of this moment, not because of their assumptions, not because of the way she was being seen right now. And that realization settled into her like something warm, something steady, something unmovable. When she lifted her gaze again, nothing about her had shifted outwardly, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she stood, in the way she occupied the space without asking permission, without demanding recognition, simply existing in truth while the rest of the scene slowly caught up to it. The radio on Reeves's shoulder crackled once more, clearer this time, the voice on the other end beginning to form words that carried weight, words that would not just fill silence but change it. And as the first syllables came through, cutting cleanly through the layered noise of the night, the fragile stillness broke not with force but with clarity, the kind of clarity that does not argue, does not persuade, but simply reveals what has always been there, waiting for someone to finally listen. The radio did not shout, it did not rush, it spoke with a clarity that cut through everything else like a straight line through noise, each word landing with quiet precision as the dispatcher's voice confirmed what had been available all along. The vehicle identification number matched, the registration returned a name, and that name was Aaliyah Carter, spoken plainly, without hesitation, without doubt, a fact delivered into a space that had been built on assumption, and for a brief second, nothing moved, not the officers, not the air, not even the rhythm of the flashing lights seemed to carry the same urgency anymore. Officer Reeves did not respond immediately, his hand still near his radio, his posture frozen in the position of authority that had defined the last several minutes. But something in his expression shifted, subtle yet unmistakable, as if the structure he had relied on had just lost its foundation, and he looked down at his tablet again, not out of routine this time, but out of necessity, scanning the screen with a focus that had not been there before, searching not to confirm what he believed, but to understand what he had missed. His partner glanced at him, then at Aaliyah, then back again, the silent alignment between them beginning to fracture under the weight of a reality that did not match the narrative they had both accepted, and the space between all three of them felt different now, not tighter, not controlled, but exposed, like something that had been hidden was now fully visible and could not be ignored. Aaliyah did not move, did not step forward, did not speak. She remained exactly where she had been, her hands still visible, her posture unchanged, because the moment no longer required her to prove anything. It required them to see. And so she let the silence do what her words had not been allowed to do. She let it settle, let it stretch, let it reach them in its own time. Reeves finally lowered his hand from the radio, the motion slower than before, more deliberate, as if every movement now carried a weight he had not accounted for. And when he looked at her again, it was not with certainty, but with something closer to recognition, not of who she was entirely, but of the mistake that had already taken place. The red and blue lights continued their cycle, but the meaning behind them had shifted, no longer symbols of control, but reminders of how quickly control could be misplaced, and the quiet street that had once felt like a stage for judgment now felt like a space where truth had quietly stepped in and taken its place without needing to announce itself. Somewhere behind them, a door opened briefly and then closed again, a small sound that marked the return of normalcy. Yet nothing about the moment felt normal anymore, because something irreversible had already happened, not in action but in perception, in the realization that what had been assumed could not be undone by a simple confirmation, that the gap between how she was seen and who she actually was had been exposed in a way that would not disappear with a single correction. Reeves exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since the moment began, he did not issue an instruction, he did not reinforce control, he simply stood there, the weight of what had just been revealed settling into the silence between them, and in that silence, the truth did not feel loud or dramatic. It felt quiet, steady, undeniable. The kind of truth that does not need to argue because it has already been proven. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted gradually, like a weight being redistributed across a space that had been leaning too far in one direction, and Officer Reeves finally moved, not with the same certainty that had guided him before, but with a measured hesitation that made even the smallest gesture feel significant, as he reached toward the car where the keys still rested on the hood. Untouched since Aaliyah had placed them there, a quiet symbol of everything that had been taken from her in assumption and now stood waiting to be returned in acknowledgement. He picked them up carefully, almost deliberately, as if the act itself required a different kind of awareness now, and for a brief moment he looked at them, not as evidence, not as an object of suspicion, but as something that carried a truth he had not seen when it mattered most. His partner shifted his stance, the tension in his posture easing, though not entirely disappearing, as both men stood in a space that no longer supported the narrative they had built, and the absence of that narrative left something unfamiliar behind, something quieter, heavier, more difficult to navigate. Reeves stepped forward, closing the distance that had once been enforced so strictly, and extended the keys back toward Aaliyah, his arm steady, but his expression no longer fixed, and though he spoke, his words were fewer now, simpler, lacking the sharp edge of authority that had defined them earlier, replaced instead by something restrained, something that acknowledged without fully articulating, something that did not undo what had happened, but recognized it in the only way the moment allowed. Aaliyah reached out and took the keys without hesitation, her fingers closing around them with the same calm precision she had carried through every second of the encounter, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, not seeking apology, not demanding explanation, simply receiving what had always been hers without needing it to be justified. The exchange was brief, almost quiet enough to be missed, yet it carried more weight than anything that had come before it, because it marked the moment where control shifted not through force or argument, but through truth being acknowledged, however incomplete that acknowledgement might be. Reeves stepped back slightly, creating space where there had once been none, and his partner mirrored the movement, both of them now positioned not as enforcers of a conclusion, but as participants in a moment that had moved beyond their control. And for a second the three of them stood there in a stillness that felt entirely different from the one before, not tense, not suspended, but resolved in a way that did not require words to explain it. Aaliyah glanced briefly at the car, then back at Reeves, and when she spoke, her voice remained as calm as it had been from the beginning, not raised, not sharpened, but clear, carrying a quiet weight that did not accuse but did not soften either, a simple statement that existed between them as both fact and reflection, something that did not need to be repeated to be understood. Reeves did not respond immediately, and when he did, it was not with the authority he had started with, but with a measured acknowledgement that lacked the certainty of before, as if the moment had taken something from him and replaced it with something he had not yet learned how to carry, and in that exchange, brief and understated, the imbalance that had defined everything earlier settled into something closer to recognition, not complete, not resolved, but undeniable in a way that would not fade once the lights were gone and the street returned to quiet. The night did not end with raised voices or dramatic closure. It softened, slowly, almost quietly, as if the tension that had once filled the space had dissolved into something lighter, something that no longer needed to hold itself together. And Aaliyah stood for a moment longer beside the car, the keys resting securely in her hand, the metal cool against her skin, grounding her in a reality that had never actually changed despite everything that had just unfolded. The red and blue lights still moved across the street, but they no longer felt sharp or intrusive. They felt distant now, like echoes of something that had already passed, and one by one, the patrol cars began to shift, engines idling differently, doors closing with softer intent, the scene gradually releasing its grip on the moment it had tried to define. Officer Reeves remained where he was for a few seconds longer than necessary, his gaze not fixed on Aaliyah anymore, but somewhere just past her, as if he was replaying something internally, something that could not be undone but could not be ignored either. And though he did not speak again, the absence of words carried its own weight, a quiet acknowledgement that lingered in the space between what had happened and what would come after. Aaliyah opened the driver's door with a steady motion, the soft click of the handle and the gentle shift of the interior light marking a return to something familiar, something that belonged entirely to her. And as she slid into the seat, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, she paused for just a second, not out of hesitation but out of awareness, allowing the moment to settle fully before moving forward. The dashboard illuminated in a soft glow, the engine responding with a smooth, controlled hum as she pressed the start button, a sound that felt steady, certain, unchanged by the interruption that had tried to redefine it. And through the windshield, the street stretched ahead of her, quiet again, ordinary again, as if nothing had happened, even though everything had. She adjusted the mirror slightly, and for a brief instant, her eyes met her own reflection, not searching, not questioning, simply present, carrying the same quiet strength that had held her through every second of the night. And then she shifted her gaze forward, her hands steady as she guided the car away from the curb. The tires rolled smoothly over the pavement, the movement calm, controlled, leaving behind the fading lights and the figures that stood within them. And as she drove down the street, the reflections of red and blue disappeared one by one from the surface of the car, replaced by the steady glow of streetlights that lined the road ahead. Behind her, the neighborhood returned to its silence, porch lights dimming, windows closing, the moment folding back into the night as if it had never fully belonged there. Yet something had changed in a way that would not simply disappear with distance, something that would follow not as a burden but as a truth that had been revealed, quietly, undeniably. Aaliyah did not look back, not because she was avoiding it, but because she did not need to. The moment had already said everything it needed to say, and as the road opened ahead of her, stretching into the distance under a calm, unbroken sky, the only sound that remained was the steady hum of the engine, smooth and unwavering, carrying her forward into a space where nothing needed to be proven anymore, only lived.